Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It is Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. I am Andrew Hanson, and I am fired up for two different reasons. First of all, today marks the day when we kick off our NFL coverage. But more importantly, today marks the introduction, the formal introduction of the newest member of the DFS Coach Talk team, and that is none other than Shane Caldwell. Shane, welcome to the team. How are we feeling today?
I'm feeling great. Yeah, I'm fired up for it's April, but we're ready to get into the NFL season already. Never too early to start. We're taking this opportunity with no sports to get better and always improve. And I'm excited to be on the team and really dive in deep with the NFL stuff and just help people with a lot of good information and a lot of good insight. So
That's
I'm
right.
super excited.
This is like Christmas in April to be
Yeah.
able to start talking about the NFL. We've just finished up the draft. We're starting to envision the possibility of maybe, just maybe, we get this season started on time. Even if there's a 4 to 6 week delay, odds are looking pretty strong that we're going to get a traditional full NFL season. And then to have you come aboard here, we're all just so excited. And as I mentioned, today is our first official NFL podcast here on DFS Coach Talk, and we are just going to crush it this fall. Shane is an expert on FanDuel, and I really focus my play on DraftKings. So we're going to bring you the 1-2 punch. And today marks the first day of 33 consecutive days of podcasting on the NFL. Shane and I are going to do a general NFL DFS strategy show today. And then starting tomorrow, we're going to start breaking each NFL team down one podcast at a time. And if you've been following DFS Coach Talk in recent weeks, we've been doing a lot of shows where we break down two teams per day, whether that's the NBA or the MLB. But we just decided that we wanted to really break down each NFL team one show at a time and try to incorporate some of the news we got from the NFL draft and give everybody a real in-depth preview of each team as we head towards the fall season.
Yeah, and I think in NFL, it's really important to do that because there's a ton of turnover in the NFL. You look at all the new coaching changes, new schemes, new coordinators. You got all the rookie class, and you have free agents. A lot of free agents, a lot of teams changed. So, defenses you used to attack, you might not be able to attack them the same way. Offenses that were not as good last year, they might be great for fantasy this year. So really by breaking that down and seeing how the rookies and free agents and the schemes, when we're going to be able to dive into all those things to help try to project what we're looking at for this year, because we can look at last year's statistics, that'll help, but the NFL is definitely a year-to-year league and things change. So we're always looking for that edge, and we're going to dive in deep to find that edge and learn more about these teams.
Yeah, no doubt. And for those who haven't looked at the schedule recently or have kind of forgotten, do you know that the Super Bowl is currently scheduled to be played in Tampa on February 7th, 2021? So, Shane, I've got a two-part question for you here to start off our general overview of the NFL season. So, first of all, is the Super Bowl going to be played on February 7th, 2021 in Tampa? And will the Tampa Bay Buccaneers be in that game?
I think it's going to be hard to get the Super Bowl played that at the early February. I think if they have to push things back because they're already missing some of those spring training sessions. They're going to have to push back probably training camp, probably OTAs. With pushing that back, you're got to be going back, 3 or 4 weeks at least. I'm thinking. So they're throwing out a lot of different ideas. But yeah, I can't imagine it's going to be the same date. And with the Buccaneers, a lot of this is, I'm looking at how are they going to be able to train and build this chemistry with a new team. Tom Brady was with New England for so long, had such great chemistry with Belichick and guys like Julian Edelman. I know he's got his guy Gronk, but it's not going to be the same system. It's not the same offensive line, not the same system. Tom Brady's not getting any younger. I know he's the GOAT, but I'm a little skeptical. Is he going to be able to throw those deep balls like Jameis Winston did? You can say what you want about Jameis Winston last year in that Tampa Bay offense, but he still threw for over 5,000 yards. So you can say, yeah, he choked a lot. And so the question is, are they going to run the ball more, be a little bit more of the game control, a little bit slower pace. Tom Brady's not really an elite deep thrower, deep ball
Mm-hmm.
thrower.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how much time are they going to have to train to get ready? We'll see. So depending on how things shake out in training camp, it's something that me and many people will be watching closely to see what's going to happen there. But I'm not as high on Tom Brady and the Buccaneers right now. That news could change, but I'm still a little bit skeptical. I think they'll be a good team, but I don't know that they're going to be a great fantasy team, even though they do have elite weapons all around Tom Brady.
Yeah, you make some good points there, and the bottom line is it is absolutely going to be fascinating to watch it play out. And I agree, it's a little difficult to make exact predictions at this point because we do need to see how it plays out in terms of how much time do these guys get together. Because you're right, so much of Tom Brady's past success is built on having that close relationship with his wide receivers, putting in all those reps. I mean, we've heard in years past about he and Edelman training in different areas around the country, and that's going to be the big hurdle for Tom is to try to develop that chemistry with these new receivers. You mentioned it; they've got a ton of great weapons, but he has struggled with the deep ball recently. But he's got Gronk coming to town, so that's nice. He's got to be thrilled to have that. There's one guy who not only is going to help their rushing attack with his great blocking, but to have a guy who already has all that chemistry with Tom Brady, it's certainly going to make it a lot easier. And I do think, we may see more success with Godwin, some of those shorter routes than Evans with the deep ball. I don't think we're going to have Evans like Randy Moss back in the day catching all those bombs from Brady.
Yeah.
But I think I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than you on the Bucs, but it's really going to be fun to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'll be watching in training camp to see how their offensive line is shaking out. They drafted a running back. I think it's Vaughn in the draft. See how their running backs looking to see, because that's going to be how can they move the chains and score a lot of touchdowns. But I'm a little skeptical about their offensive line. I got to see how that shakes out. They give up a lot of sacks, and Tom Brady is not a mobile quarterback. He is a pure pocket passer. He's really good at manipulating the pocket and moving around the pocket to create space, but I don't know that he's going to have that much protection. I think teams can stop that short passing game. I mean, Godwin is elite in that short passing game, and they have good tight ends, but I'm still a little bit skeptical being that he hasn't had enough time in this system and with these players. We'll see how it goes, how much training camp they actually get, how much off-season training they get. So.
Yeah, and it was also nice to see them draft Wirfs with that 13th pick in the first round to address that offensive line. And if they can shore that up, that's going to be a huge factor for them. But we'll get more into the Tampa squad once we start breaking each team down one at a time. So that'll be fun. And of course, today we've got this general strategy show. But before we dive into bankroll management and contest selection, and building a GPP lineup, building a cash lineup, I do want to take a moment and just allow you to introduce yourself a little bit, Shane, and tell folks a little bit about your DFS background.
Yeah, so I've been playing DFS for over 10 years now. I was on pretty early in the game there, and I just love analyzing statistics and watching the games, getting real life, watching film and analyzing players. And I just love how competitive it is in finding players that no one else is thinking of that are going to be low ownership guys that are going to have huge upside games. So I just love the game within the game, building lineups, doing the research, in depth throughout the week. Like I said, watching a lot of the games, learning a lot about the schemes and the strategies and those type of things. So so I just really love it, especially NFL. I mean, it's when it comes to fall time, that's all I'm doing is NFL, building lineups and doing research throughout the week. So it's great to be able to share it with everyone and give everyone more insight. And definitely, I like to play GPPs, but sometimes I'll play cash and mix it up as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I definitely love GPPs. Not necessarily a multi-mass entry guy. Like to build, smaller amount of lineups. Sometimes I'll narrow it down just to one lineup. Put that in. But yeah, I've had a good amount of success there, and I'm going to continue to success.
Yeah, and I've got to say, we are psyched to have you here on DFS Coach Talk as the newest addition to the team. And really, the way I envision it is come fall, the success we're going to have together, along with the rest of the crew here, breaking down the NFL, is sort of like we mentioned Gronk earlier. It's sort of like when Gronk spikes the ball after a touchdown. I mean, that's what I'm picturing. That's the kind of success we're going to have. We're going to have those monstrous spikes from Gronk, just like Tom Brady's hoping for.
Yeah, absolutely. With the knowledge we have, I think in combining it and everyone having a growth mindset here, being able to learn from each other and constantly looking for an edge and looking for that, stuff that other people aren't even thinking of. I think we're very creative and very strategic in that way.
Yeah, and that's certainly why we brought you on. You share that mentality, and just to give folks a little bit more of a window into how we approach things at DFS Coach Talk. We don't use optimizers. We hand build our lineups. We put a lot of our focus on the eye test, actually watching the games. And football is a little bit different with analytics in terms of some stats that are important and unique and can give you an edge. So Shane and I certainly appreciate analytics and use stats and analytics, but we also rely heavily on the eye test to build our lineups. So in terms of then actually providing value to our members, we're going to continue to do these free podcasts throughout the spring to get ready for the NFL season. When we do podcasts in the fall, those will continue to be free. But we do also invite our listeners to come become a member at DFS Coach Talk. We have weekly, monthly, and annual memberships. And if you come and join right now, those will be frozen until we get NBA or MLB back in action. And our memberships cover all three sports. And what we're going to do in NFL is provide lineups to our members, both on FanDuel and on DraftKings. If you have a preference, then we're there to cover you and support you on whichever site you want to play. So that's how we're going to approach it. And I can't wait to get started. But we do have some strategy to talk about before we get there. And of course, we are still in April. So as much as it's difficult to curb the enthusiasm here, we're going to dig into general strategy here. And then we're going to break down all the teams so that we are ready to crush it once the season kicks off. So today, we're going to be talking about bankroll management, cash versus GPP, contest selection, building successful lineups, what type of slate we like to play. And I like to start these discussions talking about bankroll management, because to me, you have to, in general, decide, okay, how much am I going to invest either in this day or in this weekend or in this week on a given sport. So Shane, why don't you give us some of your thoughts on bankroll management in general for NFL DFS?
Yeah, so sometimes I like to actually play more at the early weeks, like the first couple weeks, because I follow like the training camps, preseason games really closely and how teams have changed. So sometimes I've been able to get an edge early on. I was telling you about, I played Lamar Jackson in week 1. Based on my research, I came to Lamar Jackson as a value quarterback, and no one thought he was going to come up with, what was it, like 400 yards and 5 touchdowns passing through the air. I was hoping he would get, my research indicated he was an improved passer, but didn't expect that. So anyways, that was a huge win for me in week 1. But I bring that up is because I may play a little bit more. But I think a few different ways you can approach bankroll is you can take it week by week and say, I just want to play $50 per week, and see how it goes. Or you can take, for your whole season budget, let's say is $500 and just play, 10 to 15% of that per week. So there's a few different ways you can do that in terms of, it depends on your risk tolerance and what you want. And then from there, you just have to decide how you want to allocate your budget, what your goals are. But yeah, I think it's really important to not get too excited if you think you have a good lineup and use your entire bankroll in 1 week. But there are certain weeks where you might use a little bit more. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I like that. It is unique in that it's really the NFL is really broken down into 1 week at a time. So much emphasis on that Sunday slate that it's different to me than NBA or MLB, which are games every day. Um, it's a little bit easier to manage your bankroll when you know that for the regular season you have these 17 separate weeks, and the idea of breaking it down to maybe 15 to 20% per week, I think is a fair approach. And it's interesting because I actually like to dial it back a little bit in the first couple weeks. I like to really use the first couple weeks to get that eye test, to see everybody in their new spots, to see what the chemistry is like, where there have been changes to the coordinators, changes to the quarterbacks, to some of the skill position players. See which defenses come out and start hot, and you can really gain an edge, I think, after a couple weeks of seeing some of these changes. If you then make your adjustments, before folks who are still stuck in last year, before they make their adjustments. So I do like the idea in the NFL of varying the percentage that you commit to your bankroll on any given week. So again, getting back to a general overview, I like to go a little bit less earlier in the season, and then I've had my most success in that week 7, 8, 9, 10 area, where you've got some data to use, you've got the eye test, you can put it all together and really hone in with some confidence on your projections. So that's how I like to do it. But yeah, I agree that it's good to be flexible in the NFL.
Yeah, and I think I like both approaches. I like later in the season when we really have a lot of statistics and you just really dive into those matchups and you know a lot more about them, the teams at that point. But early in the year, I'm trying to project based on my research. I'm projecting what I think the teams are going to be and trying to use that as an edge rather than looking at the last few weeks before that later in the year and then using actual statistics. I'm trying to actually predict those projections ahead of time and to gain an edge there. So like it's like if you are on a player or a team before anyone else was on it, you're gaining the advantage. Where then all of a sudden when people are looking at game logs from before, now everyone's on that player, or everyone's on that matchup. So I'm trying to actually predict it before it happens and gain the edge that way, which isn't easy, but I have done it in certain situations. Does that make sense?
I was having a hard time there hearing. I lost you for a second, Shane. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. I think we're back and rolling here. So I didn't catch the end of what you were saying there, but another topic I wanted to hit is the idea of setting a personal goal with a bankroll, and I think it's a wise approach. And I'm not going to give advice on specifically what your goal should be, but I do like the idea of you get your bankroll to start the NFL season, and let's say it's $500. Then set a goal so that once you get to, let's say, 750 in your bankroll, then either you decide I'm going to withdraw some of that money and take a profit, go spend it on something for fun, or at that point maybe you raise the amount you play per week and you set a new goal, and so maybe you invest a little bit more per week and now you set a new goal of trying to hit 1,000. But whatever your bankroll is, Shane, what do you think about the idea of setting a specific goal?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Anytime you have a goal, that's going to help discipline yourself to try to get to that goal. So you're not playing too much, you're playing the right amount, and you can adjust your strategy to try to hit that goal. So I think that's a good idea. Like I said, so there's some weeks where I'll play more cash games because I'm trying to up my bankroll to get closer to that goal. If I lost in GPPs or something like that the week before, where some weeks I feel like I'm rolling, I'm gonna do maybe play a little bit more heavy GPPs. So.
Excellent.
That kind of plays into the bankroll.
Right. Yeah. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's talk about cash versus GPP. There's lots of different theories out there, lots of different approaches. We all have our own preferences, but especially for some folks who maybe haven't played a ton of NFL DFS and they're going to get into it this season. Shane, what are a couple different approaches that you think are most common and most successful?
Yeah, so depending on your goals and your risk tolerance, I like probably three different main approaches that I'll take. Is the 80-20 rule is 80% cash games, 20% GPPs. Now with this, it's a little bit safer. You can do some head-to-heads, you can do some 50-50s, some double up multipliers, that type of thing, and it's pretty safe. If you have a solid lineup, you're gonna pretty close to double your money. Then you still get a little bit of upside. You can put in some single entries. If you want to throw a couple in the big tournaments, you still be able to get an upside. So if your lineup goes off, you're going to be able to still, benefit from that, big payday there. So I like that approach for the most part. Then the other approach, if you want to go a little more GPP heavy, but reduce the risk a little bit, is you can go 50-50 and do about half your bankroll in GPPs and half in the cash games, 50-50s. And then the cash games, if the cash game hits, it's going to pretty much pay for the GPPs, because if your team didn't go off because you need a really, really good lineup to hit in the GPP, then at least the cash games paid for that and you're still breaking even. So you're just, reducing your risk there a little bit. And then you have kind of your multi-entry where you want to put in, 10 to 20 lineups. Let's say you don't have a bankroll to do the 150 max, but you could pretty much put in 10 to 20 lineups in some of these bigger tournaments, or you can put in lineup in several single entry and just do a few lineups, and you're going to have more upside there and more irons in the pot, that type of thing. So that's another way you can do it, is all GPP if you're feeling really good about some high upside plays that are going to be lower ownership that week. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like those different approaches, and it is a good feeling when if you're in that 50-50 range, if you at least win the cash games, if the tournaments don't work out that week, basically it's a wash. So I do support that approach. I personally usually tend to be a little bit heavier in GPP. And I have, I guess, that higher risk tolerance where I know that, if for some reason one week it doesn't work out, it's going to be a loss that week. But, I'm counting on a big week the next couple weeks. And there you go. So let's talk a little bit about the general strategy that you like to use for a GPP lineup.
Yeah. So, GPPs, you're typically you're trying to look for those hidden gems, whether it's, low ownership guys that no one's on, people kind of forgot about, that you think are going to be in a really good game script and have a really good matchup and could just have a huge ceiling game. So I remember a week last week, a perfect example of that was like Will Fuller. I can't remember if it was week 4 or 5 when he had like 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like I was on him that week because it was just, he was the perfect, scenario, the matchup, the over under for the game, the implied totals. And he was actually healthy, which is rare for that player, right? So he ended up having this monster game, and that's a perfect example of. And he wasn't that high ownership, even though some people were talking about him throughout the week. So yeah, in general, you're looking for correlation. You're looking for stacking your quarterback. If you can find a quarterback that's low owned, that's value priced, and then load up on high end wide receivers and load up on stacking his wide receivers and tight ends for that team, that's good correlation there. You could stack the defense. If you think a defense is going to dominate, score some touchdowns, shut a team out, and then the running back is like, going to get a ton of carries in the second half because of that, you can correlate those, so there's a lot of different things you can do. You can do a game stack if you feel like it's going to be one of those, 44 to 35 games, like a shootout type game. We've seen those. You can stack that, and they're just going back and forth, and they're just doing a ton of passing and those type of things. So yeah, you have to really look for high upside. You're going to have to take a little bit more risk probably, and you really have to factor in the ownership. You got to try to find lower ownership guys, and that's where that extra research does does that because you want to try to pivot off the chalk when you can, because in NFL with the injuries and everything, you get some really chalky plays. And if you hit on one of those, big plays that's low ownership when everyone else was on the chalk and the chalk ends up being bad chalk, then that's when you gain that advantage. And that's the risk you got to take sometimes. So.
Yeah, I like a lot of those features to the approach you take to GPPs. I do the same thing. I certainly like targeting those high scoring games. Anything with that over 50, and if you get a close line of maybe 3 or 4 points for the point spread, then those are the games we just absolutely load up and target and hope for that 38-35 shootout with tons of passing on both sides.
Yeah.
And so for GPPs, I absolutely like pairing QBs with 1 or 2 pass catchers. I also like your approach of pairing a defense with a running back. And you can't do that all the time. I mean, take New England, for example, a team that was just dominant on defense last year when they started out 8-0, scoring touchdowns left and right. So I was playing them a lot, but you can't necessarily pair the New England defense with the New England running back because Coach Belichick likes to shift around the usage and the carries with his running backs. Obviously, you had Tom Brady with all those sneaks for touchdowns, and he's notorious for coming up with a different game plan each week, where maybe it's James White getting featured. But that's one of the things we're going to do for our members is, make sure that we're breaking down each potential play. Defense is a big factor in DFS. A lot of people don't like the fact that it's involved, but it is. And so we're going to try and maximize that for you. And you mentioned ownership. That's certainly a huge factor in terms of game theory. And, which of that heavy chalk come midseason are we going to play? When are we going to avoid the chalk? So Shane and I will certainly be on top of that. In terms of a cash lineup, I want to talk about a couple different strategies. It's not what like I said, I don't, my majority of play is in the GPP. So I take a little bit of a different approach to the cash game because it is so much more competitive than it was in years past. A lot of people really depend on their cash lineups in NFL for success, and I certainly support that approach. But I have found, especially mid to late season, when the amount of players dips a little bit, and people invest more in their weekly budget for cash, and things get really chalky, then it's difficult because you really have to commit to either eating that chalk and going with the herd and trying to eke out a victory, or if you make a couple different pivots to more of a tournament play, a GPP type player in your cash lineup. That's the approach I like to take, because if you get, in general, say 2 players that are more lower owned, less of a guarantee, but if they've got you that upside, if they hit, then you've differentiated yourself from the other players in that cash tournament so much that I really like it. It feels like it's a slam dunk when if you make those couple of pivots in your cash lineup that you are going to cash.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, in NFL, there's so much good information out there that even these cash game players, the pay lines are higher and higher. It's more and more competitive. It's more chalky. It's kind of the groupthink idea. So you're trying to get away from that groupthink if you can and find an edge of players that are still safe enough to play in cash, but they have upside and no one's thinking about them, whether that's because they had a couple bad games before that for whatever reason, or people are just so on these other chalk plays, or they're targeting certain games, but they're not thinking of other players and other games. So yeah, you almost have to take a little bit of a GPP strategy in cash games sometimes to gain an edge there. Otherwise, it's very difficult to find the edge when everyone is, you're playing people that are 30-40% ownership, and then it's just like just one player makes the difference there, and that's where you got to find those guys. So, and if those chalk players, like I said, if they don't do well, then you're going to be able to gain an edge there as well. So,
yeah, a couple other points I want to make on the cash lineup, sort of dovetailing off the points you made about the GPP approach in terms of stacking.
Yeah.
I generally shy away from stacking the quarterback with multiple receivers in a cash lineup. I like to spread out the risk a little bit. I save those big game stacks for the GPPs. In the cash lineup, I like to spread out the risk a little bit and try to cherry pick players, from here or there in good matchups. Certainly, I like to get exposure to the high-scoring games, the projected high-scoring games. But in terms of a quarterback with multiple pass catchers, I don't do that quite as much in cash games. But in terms of combining a defense with a running back, that I will continue to do in cash games. I think it's very successful if you focus in on teams that rely heavily on that bell cow back to get those carries in the second half, and pair them up with your defense who's got a weak opponent and likely to keep you, or has a decent chance of keeping you in that 7 to 10 points allowed area. Maybe get a couple of turnovers. Certainly like to stack guys against Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston, you mentioned the mistakes he made last year.
Yeah.
Pile up the big yardage, and he had the 30 touchdowns, but he also had the 30 interceptions. So, targeting those turnover-prone quarterbacks. So I do like to keep the defense and a running back together in the cash lineup. What do you think about those approaches?
Yeah, that's great. I like in terms of having like a one-off. I'll take a quarterback who I think might be a value price, but I think has like rushing upside. Like a perfect example would be like Josh Allen last year. Like he didn't have that many good receivers, so he wasn't really passing a lot, but the guy would rush for a ton of touchdowns, and sometimes he would rush for 80 yards, get a touchdown, and then still throw like one bomb, one touchdown. That was enough to hit value for him because he was usually pretty cheap and really not that low, pretty low ownership because, he plays for Buffalo. They're not exactly like a dynamic offense, but the dude just had a knack he was like their red zone running back, Everyone knew Lamar Jackson had value there, but Lamar Jackson was like, $3,000 more expensive than Josh Allen, right? So if you want to load up, I want to play Michael Thomas and my wide receiver, I'm going to throw Josh Allen in there, So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the way I approached it a lot of times. I'm looking for, guys that are still really good value, but, didn't necessarily have to correlate them, especially if they don't have that good of wide receivers like Buffalo last year, So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they've certainly addressed that area, but, one step in the process is, figuring out throughout the week which of those value players we're targeting and who we think has a strong matchup. But then the next step in the decision-making process and the strategy is, of course, picking which site you're going to play. And there are some significant differences between DraftKings and FanDuel. I know you prefer to play on FanDuel. So share some of the differences that are important to you in terms of the scoring and the approach that you take with FanDuel.
Yeah, so with FanDuel, you don't get any bonuses for 300-yard passing bonus like you do in DraftKings or 100-yard bonus there. So that means you could take a running back that you might think is just only going to get like 60 yards, and maybe he's like a short yardage red zone, goal line type running back, and you think that he's going to get 2 touchdowns, So that's kind of what you're looking for there. You're only getting half point PPR, points per reception, with FanDuel. So you're not necessarily going to target those guys that that are kind of technicians that run a lot of short slant routes and get a lot of like passes, but they don't really get touchdowns that much. You're looking for more guys that get targets in the red zone. What's their red zone target share? Maybe they're big play upside guys. They're speed guys that just will catch like a 70-yard touchdown. That type of thing. And you're looking at running backs that probably are more first and second down running backs. They're not necessarily pass receiving running backs, because you're looking for guys that have good volume, that are going to get a lot of rushing volume, and also are going to get the red zone carries as well. Because you need more touchdown upside really to win there, and obviously yardage. But DraftKings will be a little different with the full PPR there. So that's really the main differences. The defenses are pretty much the same. I think when you're looking at FanDuel versus DraftKings, you can look at the player salaries and try to identify. I might look at DraftKings and just divide out the player salary by the total salary, which is $50K on DraftKings, and then I'll do the same thing for FanDuel, $60K salary, and see, is that guy on FanDuel a really good value based on DraftKings pricing? Is he underpriced? So you're looking for people that are underpriced and that fit that criteria that I was talking about. Not always PPR guys, and FanDuel. So some players can meet both those criteria, but it's pretty rare,
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's overlooked. So I do want our listeners to keep that in mind and make sure they do it as we get going with NFL DFS later this year, is calculating what percentage of the salary cap does that player cost on a given site, and you got to take into account the scoring differences. You can't just look at a player's price tag on one side or the other and make that decision, and you can't just blindly play a player on both sites on a given week just because you think he's a strong matchup. I mean, there may be a major difference in price value. And of course, you may find unexpected values from other players on the slate on a given site where you say, McCaffrey, I love him on DraftKings because he's PPR. Maybe he has a slightly lower price tag on FanDuel, but you find some other guys that are much cheaper who you think are very likely to score touchdowns. So, there's a lot to take into account other than just the price tag. But as we sort of mentioned earlier, I do prefer DraftKings in general. I really love the PPR scoring. I love targeting players who, you can find guys that are more in that 4K range who you're expecting to have a significant number of catches and get that value in PPR. So that's how I like to break it down in general. But I know you've got some players in mind as specific examples on either site that you like to target. So let's use those to try to put this into context.
Yeah, so you kind of got to look at the roles of players on each team and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and that'll help you determine that. So let me give you a couple of examples. So I can take two running backs from the same team. I'm going to take the Cleveland Browns, and you got Kareem Hunt. If you look at his role, he's obviously he's got elite, quickness and speed. He's got really good hands. He's really more of a pass receiving in that offense. He's more of a pass receiving running back, but he's got touchdown upside as well, which is good. So he might be more of a DraftKings guy. And typically his price isn't as high because he's not getting as much volume. So he might be a good play where you get him at 5K on DraftKings. That allows you to load up on other positions. And he has one of those games where he ends up getting 6 or 7 catches and a touchdown, and that's going to be enough for a guy that. And then on the same team, a guy that I probably target on FanDuel is Nick Chubb, because Nick Chubb is kind of a high volume, bigger back. He can hit the home run for touchdowns. He's the red zone guy. He's probably going to get a lot of goal line carries, and he's going to get really high volume. And so that's an example of like a FanDuel guy. Other guys you can think of FanDuel would be like Mark Ingram. He's not really going to catch a lot of passes, but they're in the red zone all the time. So he's getting a lot of touchdowns, not necessarily a lot of yards. And then if you go back to DraftKings, think about guys like Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler early in the year was pretty cheap, and it took people a little while to realize how good of a receiver he was and how dynamic he was. And he was winning people a lot of money because of all his just pass catching role that he had there, which is really good. And then if you think about receivers on DraftKings, you think about guys like Keenan Allen, Julian Edelman. I call them those technician guys. They have 12, 13. They don't really score a lot of touchdowns, but they're really good at those slant routes, those quick routes, and they just rack up the points, and they can still typically get to 100 points. And then I'll give you an example, like FanDuel, a guy I was playing last year at the end of the year is a good FanDuel play was Devontae Parker from the Miami Dolphins. Like people are like, this guy was a disappointment early in his career, but all of a sudden he started having 2 touchdown games and he would only have like 60 or 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, like 4 or 5 receptions, right? But that's a huge value on FanDuel because he's not as expensive, but he's just getting touchdowns a lot and not even necessarily catching that many passes. A lot of long catches, long passes. These guys have a lot of air yards. That's one of the statistics we'll look at. Guys like Marquise Brown, in that game in week 1 last year, he only had 4 catches, but he had 2 touchdowns, 147 yards. Like, that's a FanDuel play to me, because he's not projected to be a high volume guy. But he's just a classic example of like Deshaun Jackson, FanDuel guy. He's just so fast and dynamic. When he's healthy, he can hit you for like the 80-yard touchdown. Like, he's the guy that you can gain an edge on FanDuel. So just examples like that, you got to think about when you're choosing whether DraftKings or FanDuel, and trying to choose the right type of player in the right game situation as well.
Yeah, a lot of great examples there. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, the classic line of 2 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, exactly.
Ingram, a guy who's not going to catch many passes, but really involved in that rushing attack to get you the touchdowns. Devontae Parker, you mentioned, he was one of those guys I just never really got around to playing on DraftKings because you couldn't count on those receptions.
Yeah, see that exactly. I was all over him on FanDuel. He was winning me all kinds of money on FanDuel, and before people really caught on to him, I happened to catch his 2 games where he had 2 touchdowns in the games. So so that's a huge edge.
Yeah, I didn't really get around to playing him. I was busy playing guys like Keenan Allen and Edelman, guys I just love. You call him a technician. I mean, whatever you want to call him. I love those guys on DraftKings. They just rack up the catches.
Exactly. Now, here's an example, of course. Probably my favorite fantasy player, who's won me a lot of money, that does both receptions and touchdowns, Michael Thomas, right? Classic example. Not everyone can be a Michael Thomas, but if you can get a player like, the Kareem Hunt example, and he seems to be super cheap and he catches a ton of balls on DK, now you can afford Michael Thomas, who's going to catch 12 balls, 160 yards, and catch a few touchdowns. He does it all, right?
Every week.
Rare. Yeah, every single week. Exactly. So, or, you got your Christian McCaffrey, who actually rushes for long touchdowns and catches the ball for touchdowns too. But those guys are rare, and that's why they're very expensive. So sometimes you have to pivot off those guys. But, that's you got to get the players that are good value in the right role, and then position yourself to stack up on those guys that do everything, So that's always a good strategy.
Yeah, man, Michael Thomas was such a safe investment last year. I mean, he got so many targets. He caught everything that was anywhere close to him.
Yeah. He's a machine. Yeah.
Talk about chemistry with your quarterback. That was a beautiful thing. So, so that's great. Now let's get into the picture of, okay, we've decided based on whatever factors are important to you, which site you're going to play on a given week. And you might play on multiple sites, but let's hone in on, okay, well, what slate am I going to play? Am I going to play just the main slate on Sunday? Am I going to play something like a Thursday through Sunday slate? Am I going to play a showdown slate with one game? How do you like to approach that, Shane?
For the most part, I like to play the big Sunday, the main slate. The reason why is I have a process throughout the week where I'm attacking certain statistics and looking for information throughout the week, and then the news changes later in the week, and where I may make adjustments. But I want to be able to have the full week to prepare and look for players that I think are gonna be really good and line up, be able to have lineup, good construction of your lineup, and to wait for injuries, those type of things. So I prefer the full slate with all the players, and there's just a lot more players to choose from, and I feel like I can gain an edge better by that. Again, getting low ownership, really high upside type players that people aren't on. Sometimes if I identify something earlier in the week that I think is a big edge, I will play that Thursday through Sunday slate, which is a bigger slate. It covers more games. And I like to cover that. I like to play that because I'll get a few players early in the week that I'll get at really low ownership that end up going off. And then later in the week on the Sunday slate, that player becomes chalk because they found out information that I found out a few days ahead of time. So I do like to play the Thursday through Sunday slate as well. Sometimes if I identify some players that no one's on early in the week, but I feel like once they do more research, they'll figure that out later in the week, like a chalky player that ends up being really good. So so that's my main approach. I think that the larger the slate, the more options you have to try to find try to find good players.
Excellent. Yeah, in the last year or two, I've shied away from the multi-day slates a little bit more, focused a lot in on the main Sunday slate. And I do like the late swap on DraftKings, and I like the strategy throughout the day of pivoting and strategy in terms of late injury news, being able to make changes and gain an edge on folks who aren't on top of that. But the other thing I want to talk about, the other slate, is the showdown slate, because I play a lot of them. I love the showdown slate on DraftKings. It is significantly different than the single game slates on FanDuel, and that really comes down to the rules. And so I want to touch on those a little bit. On the DraftKings showdown slate, you have 6 players. You've got your captain and 5 flex players. And the captain, he costs 1.5x salary, but he also gives you the 1.5x points. And so the fact that you're changing the salary once you bump up to a captain, that really changes things compared to FanDuel with the MVP, because you get 1.5x points on FanDuel for your MVP, but he doesn't cost any more. So you've got a major strategy piece there on DraftKings of, who do you want to pay up for as your captain and stay within that salary cap. And then the other thing is you have a bigger player pool on DraftKings. You can play a defense in a showdown slate along with the kicker if you want. On FanDuel, you can't play the defense. So I know that you don't seem to spend as much of your focus on the showdown slates as I do. Are those rules differences part of the reason why?
Yeah, I think sometimes on FanDuel, you got to go into that contest knowing that you might have even if you hit on the best lineup, like the perfect lineup, you might be tying with like 100 people, So you got to go with the right expectations when you're playing those showdown slates. There's just it's a ton of variance. It's kind of a crazy slate, and you're going to get just a lot, super high ownership. You're going to have players that are 90% owned, So you got to go in with that right approach there. Yeah, and the fact that there you can play a person in the captain without it costing more salary. That makes the captain spot pretty chalky. So you have to really take some crazy high risk on putting someone in the captain slot that's actually a low salary type player if you're trying to get a lower ownership there. Those slates are exciting because you can just sit down on that prime time and watch the game, and the whole contest plays out right before your eyes. So it is exciting in that matter. But in terms of really digging in to do deep analysis on multiple players and multiple teams and matchups, there's not as much research to do, so it's a little harder to gain an edge there. I keep bringing up edge because I feel like if you can gain an edge, that's how you win, and that's how you get up in those, GPPs and that type of things.
Absolutely, and that's a point I wanted to make sure we hit on. Is with all of this strategy, I think the most important thing is you have to know and learn your strengths. So if you have if you're having some trouble with bankroll management, then learn about that weakness, turn it into a strength, try and find some discipline. If you can go back and study your success on FanDuel versus DraftKings, maybe that'll surprise you. Maybe you'll realize, I should focus more on one or the other this year, because the way it looks and whether you're comfortable with interacting with, certainly that's important, but it's not as important as your success rate. So knowing your strengths, your weaknesses, your actual performance. Same thing with these slates. Go back and study it. Or if you don't have much data, look at it the first few weeks of this upcoming season. What's your success rate on the showdown slate? What's your success rate on the main slate? Because all of these are fun. I mean, you talked about the fun of sitting down and having it be a one-game showdown slate, a primetime game. I mean, I love that aspect of it. But if I wasn't successful in the showdown slates, I wouldn't play as much. So that's one thing I want to have folks keep in mind. But the thing I want to wrap up on here is, as we sort of tie everything together, is, what are a couple contests that you actually like to play? And the names keep changing. The dollar amount can change a little bit on these different sites, but once you settle on a bankroll and you're thinking about your breakdown of GPP versus cash, what are some of the types of contests that you actually want to enter that you think makes the most sense for you in terms of building the bankroll?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like on FanDuel, most people are going with the 50-50. You want to get at least 100 entries on that, the 100 person pool contest there, because you're going to be able to get a little bit more variance there. So 50-50s. They have some big double ups. You can put in multiple lineups in the double ups on FanDuel, and those are usually pretty good for the pay lines. And then you have just multipliers, double ups there as well. And then you can do head to heads if you want to be able to create a little more of a safety net in case you don't hit the cash line. You can cash on some of those head to heads. And then on the GPP side, besides maybe taking a few shots at the big, $1 million tournament, I really like finding a little bit higher priced smaller tournaments like the $50 or $100 single entry tournament, because I know I'm not up against a multi-mass entry 150 lineup guy. And if you win one of those, you only have to beat, let's say, 500 or 600-700 people, and you could win, $5,000-$6,000. So I've had some success in those. The smaller lineups, if you can find, like I said, you can find a couple lower ownership guys that aren't chalky, and you can beat that. It's easier to beat that 700 than beating 100,000 people in the big tournament. Yeah. You need multiple, I call it, you need a miracle lineup for those, right?
Yeah. Right.
So, where you just need a really good lineup to take down those single entry smaller tournaments. So some of the smaller tournaments are fun to play because it's a lot lower score to take down that tournament and to get the victory. Where to take down the big $1 million tournament, the prize is very enticing, but you need almost a miracle. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I like that. A lot of good stuff. No matter what, I like the single entries in cash or the GPP. That's really a smart way to give yourself a better shot, level the playing field. If there are contests that you see that are in your price range where it's a few more, maybe 3 or 4 entry max, I highly recommend those as well. But being a GPP player, I do play the Millionaire Maker. It varies how much I play on a given week, but I've had good success. Even hand building a bunch of lineups. The best week I ever had, I hand built almost 100 lineups in the Millionaire Maker on GPP. I think like 85 of them cashed. So we're definitely not going to, as GPP players, tell you that you shouldn't play the Millionaire Maker. We do think it makes sense to balance it out with a lot of single entries and not have that be your only focus. But yeah, I mean, they're fun, and you do need to hit across the board to get a high finish. But that's what we're going to do, Shane, is try to help people build those lineups every week to give them the best shot for a high finish.
Yeah, we're not going to leave any stone unturned. We're going to dive into it and use a lot of good information, and we're going to be watching a lot of football and diving in and following, training camps and OTAs, everything, following that very closely. Because like I said, it changes. NFL is year to year, it changes, and week to week, it changes as well. So really, you have to do the full analysis to find out stuff that people aren't on, and be able to fade the chalk. And be able to take down some of these big tournaments and cash in the cash games as well. So definitely excited to get into it. And by us starting early and already doing our research, we're gonna be able to have a better base of knowledge and more up to date on these current rosters and see how they progress, and then make adjustments as we need to. So I think we're going to be ahead of the game there, and that's what we're all about. So.
That's right. And as we mentioned, we're going to start breaking down each NFL team one podcast at a time. Tomorrow, Shane and I are going to tackle the Cardinals, and that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to start to get all the information we can gathered for you incorporate the draft, the new additions to each team in terms of players, the coaching staff. So I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to start doing that every day for the next 32 days. So, Shane, it's been a real pleasure here today. Any final thoughts as we wrap up on our NFL strategy show?
I'm excited. Tomorrow we get to talk about how stupid Bill O'Brien is. I'll leave it at that, right?
Yeah, we're going to start, breaking these teams down and talk about the offseason trades and the draft picks. It's hard to keep track here, but we're going to, I think we may have the schedule up on the website. If it's not up there, it'll be up there soon. But we'll start cataloging these podcasts for everybody on YouTube so that, you can listen to it now and start to strategize. And then also, later in the summer, come back and pick a specific podcast that you want to touch up on as you think about strategy. So we're going to kick that off again tomorrow. I want to thank you all for listening. On behalf of my NFL partner, Shane Caldwell, I am Andrew Hanson, and you have been watching and listening to DFS Coach Talk.